So here we are. We've gone through the journey. We've talked about motherboard, CPU, RAM, GPU. Now, final leg of the journey. We're going to talk about your storage devices. So stay tuned. Nice thing about storage devices is that there's only a couple of things that you need to remember. There's two main types. There is the hard disk drive, or HDD, and then there's the solid state drive, or SSD. So basically, a hard disk drive, or simply a hard drive, is a 3.5-inch or 2.5-inch device, kind of like here. And what it is, it's little platters, little metal platters that spin at a certain rate, either 5,200 RPM, or I'm sorry, 5,400 RPM, 7,200 RPM, and there are some that can go even faster. But as these platters spin, there's these little read arms, read and write arms that kind of flicker back and forth over the platter. And what these do is that as the platter spins, it's looking for the information that you're looking for. So because of the mechanical nature of these hard drives, the fastest that they can go is anywhere between 100 to 200 megabytes per second. The 5,400 RPMs typically run at about 100 megabytes per second, and then 7,200 typically run at about 150 megabytes per second. So that's your hard drive. What about an SSD, or solid state drive? So with SSDs, there's no mechanical moving parts. All it is little NAND flash chips that are put onto a printed circuit board, and then there's a controller that tells everything what to do. So since there's no moving parts and it's just these NAND flash chips, it can actually move at a much higher rate. Now with SSDs, it typically depends on whether or not you're using the SATA drives or you're using NVMe, but we're going to talk about that here in just a second. So with SATA SSDs, your more typical ones that first came out in the 2.5-inch form factor like this, those run at a maximum of roughly 550 megabytes per second. So they're anywhere from 2.5 to 5 times faster than your typical hard drive. So this can make your operating system load faster, games load faster, any web pages. Basically, the snappiness of your system is going to be a lot better because you're not having to spin a platter multiple times in order for an ARM to read it. It's just right there on the chip, ready to go. So that's your typical SSD running off of the SATA bus. Now your NVMe, which look like this is an M.2 drive. It's 22 millimeters wide, 80 millimeters long, typically. They come in varying lengths. Basically, it looks like a stick of gum, and that you connect into this specialized connector here, and it'll run. Now they can be keyed, I'm sorry, tangent. They can be keyed to run through the SATA bus, so those drives will only get the same theoretical max as your 2.5-inch SATA, but the M key will actually fit into and run off of the PCI Express bus. Now this on the Gen 3 bus, which is when they were first introduced to my knowledge anyway, these can run up to a theoretical max of 3,500 megabits per second, or I'm sorry, megabytes per second, or 3.5 gigabytes per second. It just sounds better when you say 3,500, so that's why they market it as such. Now the newer Gen 4 NVMe that run off of PCIe Gen 4 lanes, those are theoretically twice as fast because they double the bandwidth on the bus. But as of right now, the fastest that I know of hits about 5,000 megabytes per second, or 5 gigabytes per second as far as transfer rates. But what does that mean in the real world? So in the real world, your hard drive, you really only want to use those nowadays for bulk storage. As long as you're not really using or installing your operating system on them, they're actually pretty fast. It does take a little bit longer for your games to load, sure, but it's nowhere near as long as if you're running your the OS, like Windows, off of that same spinning platter. So it's spinning, trying to read Windows as it's trying to get all the information it needs for your games. So it's just going hectic. So it's really slow in that sense. So if you put your operating system onto an SSD and then all of your other files onto a mechanical drive, it's going to seem a lot snappier, especially since the SSD is carrying the operating system. Those will go a lot quicker. Now, do you really need an NVMe, like a PCI Express SSD? Well, that all just depends on what you do with your computer. If you're photo editing, video editing, programmer, anything along those lines, then I would suggest it just because it can save time when you're working on your projects. Now, do you absolutely need it? No, absolutely not. If you're using it for just typical use, even gaming, and if you're trying to do like budget workstation, like you're just getting into some professional stuff, then having your operating system on a 2.5-inch SSD and then keeping everything else onto your mechanical drive for mass storage is going to help you out a lot. It's still going to save you time, but if you're doing professional workloads, then we can go over a much more in-depth drive setup that I would recommend that I actually use. But in all honesty, hard drives spin a lot and they are slow. SSDs running off the Sata bus are about 5 times faster, but they can go faster if they run off the PCI Express bus. So NVMe is faster than a Sata SSD, which is faster than a hard drive, but in the real world, unless you have them all sitting side by side as far as SSDs go, you're never going to know a difference. So there you have it. There's the main. I didn't script this video, as you can tell. So my mind is a little all over the place. But that's going to be your difference between your hard disks or hard drives, your SSDs, and then NVMe SSDs. It's all mostly about speed and reliability. Your mechanical drives are going to go out a lot quicker than your SSDs because there's an aspect of mechanical failure there. SSDs don't have that same limitation, but because they do use NAND flash chips, they have limited read and write. But it's usually so high up there that you're not going to hit those by the time you're replacing the system that it's being used in. So that's going to do it for this week, guys. Thank you so much for joining me on the end of the leg through our back to basics journey. Next week, we are going to dive into a little more in depth. So this was all for beginners. If you've got some value and you want to move forward, join us next week as we start our new series. We're going to hit the ground running, and we're going to take all of our knowledge that we've gained over the last 10 weeks, and we're going to start applying that into a more practical sense when it comes to personal computing. So get subscribed to the channel, hit that bell icon so you don't miss any more tips.